Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week's first question comes from Zacchaeus4, who says, did you know the tweet about flag burning was just a few minutes after Fox and Friends had a segment about flag burning? On a scale of 1 to, oh fuck, we are all screwed, how much does it concern you our president's policy positions are largely just minute-by-minute reactions to what he sees on Fox News, more specifically, Fox and Friends? I'm going to go with a 9.999 or whatever the next increment below the full oh fuck we're all screwed is on that scale, because I'm saving the full oh fuck we're all screwed for the fact that President-elect Donald Trump also reads InfoWars. And apparently treats that as a serious news source. It's like, in Donald Trump's mind, there's like the New York Times, the BBC, and InfoWars. And I'm not sure if InfoWars isn't at the top of that list when he's ranking them mentally. I'm pretty sure that he treats InfoWars as a more credible source than the New York Times or the BBC or NPR or whatever. And that is incredibly troubling, as it is that he watches Fox News and seems to take his opinions on serious matters just sort of off the rack from whatever he sees. He doesn't seem like a terribly curious man. He doesn't seem like a terribly thoughtful man. He seems like someone who watches a story on Fox and Friends about something, flag burning, and he hears Brian Kilmeade go, boy, flag burning sure is terrible. There ought to be some kind of punishment for that. And Donald Trump, who has never given this issue any amount of thought at all, hears that and goes, yeah, that sounds good. Hey, I wonder if I can get something going with that. And he starts tweeting. And that's a terrifying prospect, because he's going to be in charge in a little over a month. He's going to be in charge for 4 years. Corey Donaldson, if you could choose some songs for a film starring yourself, which songs would you go with? If I could choose some songs for a film which stars myself, I would go with Highway Songs by Gordon Lightfoot, A Flower in the Desert by The Cult, Vow by Garbage, All the Things She Said by Simple Minds, Love Like Blood by Killing Joke, and At the 100th Meridian by The Tragically Hip. I guess it would depend on whether the movie was starring me or whether the movie was about me. If the movie was about me, then I don't know. There might be some questionable music in there. There was a lot of Billy Joel being played on my stereo when I was in high school. And yes, I was in high school in the 90s, and I was still listening to Billy Joel. So draw whatever conclusion you will from that. And also the Verve Pipe. So there'll be a lot. It'll be Billy Joel and Verve Pipe for the adolescents, and then you get into adulthood, and there's still some choppy waters to navigate there. You have to get through Fight for Fighting, but eventually I get into my Johnny Cash phase, and you'll find some Liz Phair in there as well, as I discovered her, and Amy Mann. Went through a nice Amy Mann phase for a while. Then finally I got to like Springsteen and Modest Mouse, which is still one of my favorite bands. And eventually you'll get to some, at least what I would now consider some good stuff, but it'll be rough going there for a while during the teen years, especially if you don't have the same nostalgia that I have for songs like The Freshman. Troubleshooter 125. I'm intrigued to hear that Late Seating is tackling Star Wars Episode 1, Steve. I'd be curious to know whether you think you can give it a fresh look without channeling Mr. Plinkett of Red Letter Media and his excellent dismantling of that film, or any of the other critiques which it has so rightfully deserved. Do you think you and Jason can bring something new to the table? You will have to judge for yourself, of course, and that episode goes up today, by the way, and you can listen to it at your convenience. I think that we did a pretty good job of it. We recorded it last week, and I haven't listened to the whole show yet. I just listened to it as we were making it, and I think we did a fair job of not covering the same material that other reviews of the movie have covered. I think Jason and I were both very aware of wanting to avoid the Plinkett review because we're both huge fans of that. Like, I think he and I are both great admirers of the Red Letter Media Star Wars reviews, not only because they're hilarious, but they are really sharp works of film criticism. And I think the insights that Jason and I offer in our review of the film are different than the ones, or at least come from a different place and are aimed at different targets, if that makes sense. And I think it was also funny, which is very important to me. Obviously, the Plinkett reviews are hysterical, but I think Jason and I are two fairly funny guys, and I think our review is pretty funny, as well as hopefully a good movie review when we get to the back half of it and we actually start trying to be film critics. So yeah, give it a listen. I was really pleased with how it went, and I think it'll turn out to be a really good episode. And I do think that we will be able to tell you some things about the movie that you haven't heard before in ways that you haven't heard them said before, hopefully. Francois Lacombe. Hello, Steve. In 1811, the French writer and philosopher Joseph de Maistre said, "Every nation gets the government it deserves," often mistakenly attributed to better-known commentators such as Abraham Lincoln. Do you think Trump's election is a counterexample that invalidates the quote, or does it reveal something really unsettling about the American people? Firstly, let me deeply apologize to all of the French speakers in the audience for my pronunciation as I read that question. It was abysmal. My French pronunciation is terrible, and I take full ownership of that, and I'm deeply sorry for subjecting you to that. I do not think it invalidates the quote. I was actually thinking about that quote and the idea that we get the leaders we deserve back during the summer. When Trump got the Republican nomination, I thought that the fact that a person of his non-existent character who had run a campaign like he ran that was based on blatant bigotry and deception and fear-mongering and was free of any significant content, the fact that that person running that campaign could rise to that level in our politics said something very damning about our country. And I think that statement has now been amplified even more so by the fact that that person won the election and is going to be the next president. It does not invalidate the quote at all. We deserve Donald Trump because there are enough of us that agree with him. There are enough of us that think he's right, that share his bigotry, that share his prejudices, that share his proud, willful ignorance, that are impressed for some reason by his empty boasting. And there are enough of the rest of us who enable it, or at least look the other way. And when you ignore intolerance or you tolerate intolerance, you empower intolerance. And you empower and enable bigotry and all the other awful things that Donald Trump embodies and exemplifies on a daily basis. And now he and a bunch of people just like him in his inner circle are going to be in charge for at least the next 4 years. That's what we get. That's what we deserve. It's our fault. Patrick Dodds. Steve, where do you stand on the TNG episode The Outcast? Some have criticized it as a sidestep of LGBTQ issues, which Trek has been accused of for decades, by using analogies rather than addressing it directly. However, it affected me as a shamefully homophobic adolescent by helping me to see the absurdity in homophobia via a science fiction paradigm, like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield did for racism for TOS. What say you? I think The Outcast is an excellent episode, and I find its message to be very effectively delivered, but I am a cis hetero person. Maybe if I were a gay person or a trans person, I would feel differently. But from where I sat, both as a teenager in the 90s watching it and now as a grown-up watching it again, I think it's a terrific episode and a very thought-provoking episode and an episode that carries a very important message, and a message that in the early 90s when that show was on, a lot of people watching Star Trek may not have heard before, may not have considered before. So I think it's a good episode, and I don't think the fact that it deals in analogy necessarily is a point against Star Trek, because that's what Star Trek has always done. But I do think people have a legitimate complaint about the lack of LGBTQ characters in Star Trek. People have pointed out for many years that even though the various Star Trek shows and movies have been great about having casts that are very diverse in terms of race and very diverse in terms of gender, there has never been an openly LGBTQ character as a regular cast member on a Star Trek show. Until now, there will be an openly gay character in the upcoming Star Trek Discovery series, which I thought was awesome. And they sort of retroactively made Sulu gay in the new Star Trek movies, the Abrams verse. But other than that, it's sort of avoided the whole thing. It's like, where This beautiful, tolerant, pluralistic future society, where are all the gay people? I think that is a legitimate criticism. Matt Helmers. Hey Steve, I substitute teach in a very poor rural community in Louisiana. Today was a particularly difficult day. In addition to several fistfights, I had to console a sobbing child whose stepfather had just killed himself. These children are only in second grade. I was struck by a thought I couldn't shake. As I read the attendance rolls, I named white, black, Latino, and Muslim students. Many people don't know this, but the Deep South is one of the most truly integrated areas. These children suffer innumerable problems that would break many adults. Many are illiterate. Several are the product of incest. Almost none of them have fathers at home due to either incarceration or abandonment. They live in deep poverty, and many of their parents struggle with addiction. Their community is polluted with the foul, odorous fumes from a nearby paper mill. You wouldn't imagine the uncontrollable anger these young children have. One issue they don't suffer among one another, however, is racism. These children hardly understand the concept of racial animus. I couldn't shake the loathing I feel for an individual like Donald Trump. How dare he, a billionaire from a highly segregated city, stir up racial resentment in depressed communities like this? How dare he redirect their understandable anger towards one another? How dare he add to the almost insurmountable obstacles these children face? Do you think he understands the harm he may do? Do you think he understands the dangerous anger he may unleash? It was a particularly difficult day in Bogalusa. The short answer is no. I don't think Donald Trump does understand the harm that he's causing or the danger that he is creating. As I said in the answer to a previous question, I don't think he is a very curious or thoughtful person. And I think when he says things that stir up hatred and bigotry and fear in mostly white people against mostly non-white people, or in Christians against non-Christians, or in natural-born Americans against immigrants, I think he's doing it to appeal to a certain group of people that he needs the support of, or that he thinks he can get the support of. He's looking toward economically disadvantaged white people, and he's telling them, you should vote for me and you should support me because I will protect you and defend you against all these other people who are out to get you, or who are responsible for the problems that afflict you in your life. And often it is people like the people you describe seeing in your classroom as children. It's people who are brown. It's people who are from other countries or whose parents are from other countries. It's people who practice atypical religions for our society. And it's people who are suffering from economic disadvantages just as badly as the white folks are, but are being blamed for their own problems by those white people. And they're also being blamed for the problems that the white people face, because that's the message that they're getting from people like Donald Trump. The sad part is it's nothing new, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. This has been the message of the Republican Party for 50 years. It was the essence of the Southern strategy. Lyndon Johnson described the Southern strategy in the 60s as the ability to convince the lowest white man that he is still higher than a black man. And that's a very simplified version of what Donald Trump does. And yeah, it dehumanizes and afflicts greater harm on people of color, specifically their children. You're absolutely right. People who are the most defensive, the defenseless, the most dependent on others for their care and their upbringing, their security, their education. These are young people who should be given every advantage that we possibly can. And instead, we are attacking them or allowing others to attack them. It's reprehensible. It's inexcusable. And you have every right to be angry about it. You should be angry about it. We should all be angry about it. Ahoy Yerno, is capitalism on the decline? How are we going to stop or reverse this massive redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich? Don't get me wrong, I'm a capitalist, and I'm as afraid of communism as I'm afraid of fascism. But the way our society currently works is not honest. Capitalism requires egalitarianism, equality of opportunity, and a functional American dream, not a society where only billionaires, preferably white and male, can become president of the USA. Capitalism would work if we had a truly equal playing field. If it was a race that everybody started at the starting line at the same time, and everybody had the same distance to run, and everybody had the same obstacles to overcome, then it would be a fair system. Then people could actually say with a straight face, truthfully, that this is the land of opportunity. Because the way it works now, some people start at the starting line, and some people start 10 feet from the finish line. And the people who start 10 feet from the finish line cross the finish line with no problem, and then they turn around and they blame the people who started at the starting line for not having finished the race yet. And they say, well, that's the problem. They're holding us all back. This race would be over. We would have won this race by now. What's their problem? And just think about how twisted that is. And think about the fact that so many of us accept that version of the narrative. Anytime people are sold a view of that erases the privilege and the disadvantage and just treats everything as though everybody was on a level playing field from the start, makes it very, very, very difficult to make any kind of changes. How do you address systemic racism when most people in the country, especially the people who are the most privileged, don't see it as a problem? Either deny that it exists or just wave it off. How do you address income inequality when most people don't view it as a problem? They view poor people as responsible for their problems. They view poor people as responsible for their own poverty, even if they were born poor. They say, well, if you were smarter, if you were a harder worker, if there wasn't something wrong with you, then you would have achieved. You would have worked your way out of it. You would have earned your way out of it. We have upward mobility in this society. We tell ourselves these lies, and we believe them for our entire lives. And it's incredibly difficult to get out of it. Malevolent divinity, can you dedicate a bit to explain the difference between skepticism and denialism? A skeptic is someone who tests claims and beliefs against evidence and comes to the most reasonable conclusion. A denialist is someone who rejects evidence that cuts against their biases or tells them something that they don't want to hear or counts against their preferred conclusion. You see this in climate change deniers, you see this in creationists, and you see this in anti-feminists and people who deny the existence of racism and people who deny the existence of anti-Muslim discrimination and all of these other very popular positions among the self-proclaimed skeptics on YouTube. They're willing to completely write off the social sciences. They're willing to completely just outright ignore evidence that cuts against their conclusion. They're convinced that, sexual assault is not that big of a deal, at least in the United States. They claim to believe it's a big deal in the Middle East, but that's bullshit. They're just saying that because it's far away and they know that's not a problem they'll ever have to deal with. And they use it to sort of divert attention from people trying to talk about the problem of sexual assault here in this part of the world. So when they see surveys, when they see crime statistics, when they see any number of other bits of evidence that suggest that, rape and sexual assault are at unacceptably high levels, they come up with reasons why they can ignore it. And they say, oh, there can't be that many rapes. There can't be that many sexual assaults. It's not that big of a deal. They just flat out say that doesn't count. That evidence doesn't count. That is not skepticism. It has, in some cases, been dressed up as skepticism by people who are skilled enough at mimicking skepticism to make it sound like they're making a sound skeptical argument, when actually they are just finding a very intelligent sounding way to articulate their own rationalizations to maintain their own biases and their own prejudices. That's the difference between skepticism and denialism. Skepticism is honest. And skepticism requires us not only to examine the outer world, but to examine ourselves, to be open to the possibility, nay, the probability, that we have these biases ourselves, that I have them, that you have them, that we all have these prejudices that can affect how we view things, and that we have to strive always to be aware of them and to correct for them, so that we don't end up saying absolutely asinine things like, well, I'm not a racist, so what I said couldn't have been racist. Or, well, I'm not sexist, so what I said couldn't have been sexist. Or, I'm not Islamophobic, so what I said couldn't have been Islamophobic. Or whatever. Skeptics don't say those things. Real skeptics don't say those things. Real skeptics are honest and open and fearless at examining not only other people's beliefs and other people's claims, but their own. Denialists don't ever do that. Denialists are cowards. And maybe that's the most fundamental difference. Denialists are cowards who cling to a version of the world that they find comforting or that makes sense to them, regardless of the evidence, whereas a true skeptic is willing to search out the truth and accept it, whatever they find it to be. Dr. Babylon, Steve, is there a version of the men's rights movement that focuses on legitimate issues such as courts having a bias toward mothers in custody battles or women not being forced to sign up for selective service but without the dishonesty, misogyny, and rape apology? A version that addresses and focuses on domestic abuse against men and rape of men and tries to raise awareness of these issues and provides support for victims but doesn't try to minimize concern over domestic abuse toward women? A version that recognizes demeaning women and opposing feminism doesn't help men? There is no movement per se, but there are individual organizations that I feel fit your descriptions. For instance, Survivors UK, which is a charity that is a legitimate social service organization that is there to support men who have been victims of sexual assault or domestic abuse. And it would be nice if there were a million other organizations just like it. It would be nice if there were a social movement about, raising awareness and providing support and compassion and acceptance for men who have been victims of domestic abuse or sexual assault. That would be fantastic. There really isn't that right now as a movement. There are just a few organizations here and there that often sadly struggle for attention and for funding that very much deserve a lot more support and a lot more visibility than they have. And sadly, most of the oxygen in the men's rights area is taken up by the misogynists, by the anti-feminists, by the people who push these hateful, false narratives and these deranged conspiracy theories about, gynocentrism and men being disposable and feminazis, being responsible for all the ills of the world that men face, and just all of this hateful, paranoid, delusional bullshit that is the men's rights movement. And it doesn't leave much left over for the legitimate social workers and activists who actually want to help men who are in need. It would be really nice to flip that. To put the angry, hateful kooks on the bottom and put the actual people who are trying to help with real problems on the top. It would be nice to see that accomplished at some point. I don't know how you're going to do that or how anybody's going to do that, but it would be very nice to see. What else would be nice to see? A little bit of just a slight change, like maybe instead of having the questions on the full screen, we'll have the questions just off to the side while I answer them in rapid fire succession. In fact, let's do that now in a segment I like to call
The Lightning Round.
Lucas Hackett, One Angry Brony. Steve, in your mind, what is the worst game show you've ever seen in your life? P.S. Mark Summers or Steve Harvey? Who would win? Bill Cosby's version of You Bet Your Life was pretty terrible, actually, and a lot of those rip-offs that came after the initial success of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire back in the late 90s, a lot of those were really, really terrible. And Mark Summers or Steve Harvey? Mark Summers. Mark Summers would, I don't even know what the context is. Are they fighting? Are they playing some kind of a game? Mark Summers would win. I have complete unshakable faith in Mark Summers. Kevin Logan, you didn't answer a single Star Trek question last week. What the fuck? Okay, Kevin, I answered one this week. Is that good enough for you? Is that good enough for you, Kevin? I answered a Star Trek question. Do I have to answer a Star Trek question every week? Is that what you want from me? Will that make you happy? Justin Parallax, Steve, another more cheerful question. If you were to put together your own Justice League made up of real people from any period of history, who'd be on it? I don't know who would be on it for the entire, the full team roster, but I know the leader would probably be Harriet Tubman. Did you see her episode of Drunk History last year? Harriet Tubman was a badass. She would totally be the leader of my Justice League History Club. Jordan P. Jory, hey Steve, I notice a lot of Trump supporters say that he's pro-LGBTQ+, but how is that with Mike Pence, his vice, and pretty much all his appointees are some of the most anti-LGBTQ+ in politics? Do you think the same as me, that it's just poor attempts at apologetics for Trump, or something else you think that makes them believe he's pro-LGBTQ+? Yeah, it's apologetics. The people who are making those excuses for Trump are like Homer Simpson chasing after his pig, you know, and it flies through the air and it ends up stuck in the river, and he keeps going after it, yelling, "It's still good, it's still good." Those are Trump supporters at this point. Snarkbot Anya, what are your thoughts on hoping for a Trump impeachment? I'm kind of torn on the idea because trading Trump for Pence seems comparable to trading brain cancer for prostate cancer. You can debate which one is worse, but whichever way you go, it's still cancer and it's still probably going to kill you. Well, I think in that case, you go for the cancer that you have the best chance of staying alive for long enough so they can find a cure for it, which in this case would be Pence cancer. That's just, it's the best option of awful options. The Nether one. Hi, British person here. Any chance of more Star Trek videos? Yes, definitely more Star Trek videos to come. The next one is going to be about Captain Janeway. Actually, I have not yet written it, but I know that's what it's going to be, and I know basically the premise of it. I just need to find time to write it and make it. But yes, it's going to be coming relatively soon. So thank you for asking. I'm glad you like the Star Trek videos. Joe McClory, you are tasked to write a Star Trek. See, Kevin, more Star Trek questions. Is this good for you? Do you like this? You are tasked to write a Star Trek time travel story containing one character from each show. Who do you use? What do you set as the antagonist? Let's see. We'll go Sulu, Worf, Cisco, Tuvok. And who's a good one from Enterprise? Who's someone who's tolerable from Enterprise? Hoshi, maybe? And the antagonist will be whatever evil alien from the future came back in time and was responsible for the election of Donald Trump. That's what it'll be. Because then I can write it as a fantasy. So they can undo it and everything will be all better. Hey, that's it for the lightning round. That's it for the questions. Time for the shout out. The shout out this week goes to Go Fem Yourself, which is an awesome channel. There was a video that Go Fem Yourself put up recently about rape culture, which is something that I have spoken about in videos recently. It's a very important issue. It's something that a lot of people have a lot of very inaccurate ideas about. I would highly recommend you go check out her video on that subject, as well as various videos she's made about some of the aforementioned self-proclaimed skeptics in the YouTube atheist skeptic community that are anything but and that are extremely misleading, dishonest, and abusive people. She has some really excellent videos on that subject, and it's just an awesome channel. I think you should go check out Go Fem Yourself if you have not checked it out yet. I highly, highly recommend it. I also want to recommend, as I always do at this time every week, the Lemme Listen podcast. These are podcasts that are created and in most cases hosted or at least co-hosted by my very good friend Jason Harding, aka Jason with a D. There is Lemme Finish, which is the original podcast in the family. There is American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, a hilarious improv comedy podcast. There's Filmtastic Voyage, hosted by Mike and Alex. There is Cinetific, hosted by Professor Jason and Professor Aaron, which looks at the scientific validity of popular movies. And last but not least, there is Late Seating, the movie review podcast hosted by Jason and me, where we look at classic films and we decide whether or not the classic films deserve their reputations, whether their reputations are good or bad. And as was mentioned by Troubleshooter 125 in an earlier question in this video, our episode this week is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Yes, in honor of Rogue One opening soon in theaters worldwide, we are taking a look at the first Star Wars prequel, the infamous Episode 1. You can listen to that episode. You can listen to all of the past episodes of all of the awesome Lemme Listen podcasts by going to lemmelistenpodcast.com. And that Episode 1 Phantom Menace episode goes up today. So check it out. It is very, very good. I highly recommend it, although I'm a little biased because I'm in it. Hey, that's it for me, everybody. I am out of here once again. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your questions. Please leave a comment on this video with your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can in the next video, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So please do ask your questions in the comment section. Thanks again so much for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time, and take care. Hey, could you tell I was rushing through the end there because my camera battery's about to die? Yeah, probably not. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Anyway, thanks again so much for watching this video, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.